Hi there. Welcome along to this online training course that's been delivered to you today by Riverside Training that's going to be focusing on mental health and well-being whilst people are working from home. My name's Sam Bishop and I'll be giving you a little bit more of an introduction into me in just a few moments' time. But I just want to give you some understanding of how this course has been created and how it's been positioned for the recording that we're making today. The course has been in existence now for several months, obviously since the coronavirus pandemic started in the UK and has been affecting us all. The training course originally was created to be delivered to people in an online platform. And so there will be parts of the presentation that you will see which are naturally created to develop discussion points or opportunities for you to discuss with other people your thoughts and considerations. And if we were delivering it as a group training via Zoom, for example, there would be the opportunity to go into the breakout rooms to do that. Because this is a recording and that isn't going to be possible, what I'm going to ask you to do, or what I'm going to encourage you to do, is at the points where I ask you questions that will make you think or reflect or consider the points that we're discussing at the point of that presentation, is I'm just going to ask you to pause the presentation, take a few minutes away, think about the questions and maybe write down your answers or give it further consideration, and then return to the presentation recording, press play, and then return to the slides and the content as we then move through together. So let me move through into the content that's been prepared. And the session agenda is where we're going to be beginning today. So what we're going to explore in the time that we have together is what actually is mental health and well-being. So we're going to look at a definition of it and explore and get greater understanding about actually what that means when we say mental health and well-being. We're going to explore how the brain functions and also explore the description of psychology. We'll identify the symptoms and signs of poor mental health, so what actually that means, and the potential risk and impacts that working in isolation can have upon us. I really want to explore yourself and understand your adapting ways of working and working patterns because of the coronavirus and lockdown experience. And I'm also going to be sharing with you some good working practices for lone working. So if you are somebody who's working from home, lone working, remote working, however you want to describe it, I'm going to share with you some physical, psychological, and emotional good working practices or tips that will hopefully help you be successful as you possibly can. Last couple of points of the agenda today is that we're going to be looking at coping strategies and tools to elevate your mood, perspectives, and overall mental health. And finally, we're going to start to think about mental health and colleagues. So mental health and the people around us, and ask you to consider how you might support somebody else's mental health rather than diagnosing or being rather critical about their mental health. So at the end of this recording, at the end of this session, what I hope you're going to leave with is a better understanding about how to manage your own mental health and well-being at this time of adaptive work patterns and structures. And I also want you to know how you might support your colleagues, peers, team members, people that are around you with their mental health and well-being as they are also going through this time of adaptive working patterns and structures. I want you to leave knowing the potential challenging risks and impacts that working in isolation can have upon us and our mental health. And I want you to consider the techniques and strategies that you can implement to enhance and protect your own mental health and your well-being as you work from home. Finally, I'll leave you with a variety of tasks that will hopefully ensure that you benefit not only your own mental health, but the mental health and well-being of others as you then exit this training course and move forward. Who am I? A little bit more detail about me. So my name is Sam Bishop and I'm a business coach, an accredited psychotherapist and a director of S&G Business Development. I work with business owners, senior leadership teams and also professional athletes. My background is within psychology and psychotherapy. And so what I've really been doing over the years within psychology and psychotherapy is gaining a greater understanding about how we as individuals, how we as people feel, think, behave, and act within the world around us. That being the relationships that we have and also the reactions that we have to what may be going on in the world around us, such as the coronavirus and the impact that that's been having upon us all in recent months. Final point on the slide there emphasizes my passion. My passion is people. And I've always enjoyed talking about or implementing with others tools, strategies, and techniques that means they can help themselves, help others, and ultimately fulfill the potential that each and every one of us has within ourselves. So that's enough about me. What we're now going to do is move on to the main body of the content today. And we're going to start at this theme, these concepts of mental health and well-being. What are they and where do they come from? Let me start with this quote. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem, which means someone you know may be struggling with mental illness. And that comes from an organization that's called Time to Change. And this was a quote that's been taken from research that they published at the beginning of 2020. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem, which means someone you know may be struggling with mental illness. And the reason why I'm starting with that quote is I want to emphasize the fact that mental health challenges and mental health difficulties are all around us. They affect 1 in 4 people. So that therefore means if you think about the people in your life, 1 in 4 of them, if this quote is correct, will be in some way affected by a mental health problem. So the prevalence of mental health issues is very, very high. The bullet points on this slide emphasize that we are all very different. We will all have different experiences of mental health. So you may be very familiar with mental health and well-being as an area and a topic. You may not be so familiar with it. You may not have experienced very much within this space so far in your life. But the reality is we all have one. So we're not just talking about the mental health and well-being of others, this thing that other people have. We all have them. You and I both have our own mental health and well-being experiences and journey. This can be a challenging topic to discuss, and it can be an area that lots of people have lots of presumptions about, things they've heard, things that maybe aren't true, some myths, some things that aren't in the reality or the experience of mental health and well-being that people presume to be correct and true. So I hope as we go through the presentation today, a lot of that information will become clarified for you and you'll get a greater understanding about mental health and well-being. There are lots of different ways that mental health and well-being is talked about. And on this slide, what I'm presenting to you is a group of words or phrases that are inappropriate to be used when talking about mental health and well-being. So I'm going to share them with you and say them out loud, but I want to emphasize these are inappropriate and should not be used when talking about mental health and well-being. They are phrases such as a schizo or a psycho, a schizophrenic or a depressive, lunatic, nutter, unhinged, maniac or mad, the mentally ill, the afflicted. They're people that take happy pills. And my 2 phrases that I really don't like are these are people that just need to man up, or these are people that just need to get over it. Let me emphasize to you again, those are inappropriate phrases or inappropriate language to use when talking about mental health and well-being. If you're somebody that uses those phrases, please stop doing so and use more appropriate language. That can be found on this slide. These are phrases or inappropriate language phrases that should be used or could be used when talking about someone's mental health and well-being. So we're talking about a person who has experienced psychosis or schizophrenia, someone who has a diagnosis of, or is somebody who's experiencing or being treated for mental health and well-being problems or challenges, a person with a mental health problem, a mental health patient, service user or client. And these are people that do not go to the GP to get happy pills. They go to receive medication, prescription drugs, or antidepressants. Okay, so there on that slide is a group of appropriate language or phrases that you should use when talking about mental health and well-being. Throughout this topic and throughout the time that you're listening to me today, please make sure that you remain curious. It's so important that you remain curious and keep your interest alive within this field. The reason why I encourage you to do that is because mental health is a fluid area. It's not fixed. This is not a black and white world experience. Therefore, we must remain open and considerate to the differences and challenges that exist within this space. Please remember the whole way through this course that every single one of us is unique. We are not robots. We are individuals, we are human beings, and we are unique and we are individual to every single body, to everybody else that we know. Finally, use your understanding of yourself or the person that you might start to think about that you may be concerned about regarding their mental health, and always use that as a base foundation or sets of knowledge to help you inform your approach to someone or to yourself if you're feeling vulnerable or if you're feeling like you're having a mental health difficulty. Use your understanding of these people around you, use your understanding of yourself to help inform your decisions and the ways that you go about approaching conversations or approaching the topics of mental health and well-being. Okay, what I'm now going to get you to do is ask you to get in some way a way of taking some notes or writing down your answers to a group of questions that I'm about to ask you. It's called the Right Brain, Left Brain quiz. It's a short test. It's going to consist of 8 questions that I'm going to pose to you. I'm going to pose a question or a phrase, and then I'm going to ask you to respond as either person A or person B. So at the end of the quiz, at the end of the test, you should have in front of you either 8 letter A's, 8 letter B's, or potentially a mixture of A's and B's. But that's what I'd like you to do now. So just quickly maybe pause the recording if you need to, get paper and pen or create a note section on your computer so that you're ready for when I ask these questions in just a moment. Okay, so first question in the quiz. Are you, person A, somebody whose home is very organized? Your drawers and wardrobes are all ordered and clear, and you are the type of person who enjoys sorting, filing, and clearing away? Or are you person B, somebody who has more of a lived-in look? You clean when you see a need and only if they have the time. So please write person A, you're somebody whose home is very organized, you enjoy sorting, filing, and clearing away. Or person B, your home has more of a lived-in look and you only really clean when you see that there's a need or if you have the time. Okay, question 2. Are you person A, somebody whose work desk and office space is usually clean and clear and has everything in its place? Or are you person B, somebody who likes to leave your work out on the desk so you can work on it whenever you're ready and when you're inspired by ideas? Please write down person A or person B, depending on which response is most appropriate for you. Your desk and office space is clear and everything in its place, or person B, a little bit more spread out and likes leaving it on the side so you're ready to work when you feel ready to. Question 3, person A, you like using the tried and tested method, or are you person B, somebody who likes creating new methods and doesn't like to follow those instructions? Question 4. Are you someone, person A, who follows directions carefully when you build furniture, making an object, etc.? Or are you person B, somebody who likes to build a model in your own way? You do not follow instructions or a manual and you make your own creations. Please answer question 4 with either A or B. You follow those directions in the instruction manuals when you build an object or a piece of furniture, or person B, you never follow those instructions and you make your creations in your own way. Question 5, are you person A, somebody who completes one project at a time, or are you person B, somebody who likes to start many different projects but doesn't really like to finish any of them? Person A, complete one project at a time. Person B, start many different projects but never really gets around to finishing any of them. Question 6, when you are asked to write a report on a subject or a topic, are you person A, someone who researches information, then outlines a plan and then begins your writing? Or are you person B, somebody who doesn't do any research and just starts working and writing in your own self-inspired way? Question 6, are you A, a researcher, a planner, and then start your writing? Or person B, somebody who just starts writing in your own inspired way? Question 7, when you are in charge of a job or a big job with many people working on it, are you usually someone who organizes, gives everyone their responsibilities, makes lists and plans, and makes sure everybody finishes their jobs on time? Or are you person B, somebody who works at their own pace, letting other people work at their pace too, and doing the jobs that they feel that they're best at, and only really taking care of problems if or when they arise? So are you person A, somebody who organizes people, gives people's responsibilities, lists, plans, and jobs, and follows up to make sure they finish their jobs on time? Or are you person B, somebody who works at their own pace, letting others work at their jobs the way that they want to, and only really taking care of problems if and when they arise? Finally, question 8, last question. Which of these activities and approaches do you like to do most? Are you A, Somebody who likes planning the details of a trip or holiday, making sure you have an itinerary so you know what you're going to do every moment that you're away on your holiday or your trip? Or are you person B? Somebody who does not like to plan an itinerary, does not like to plan a trip, but just arrive in the location and over you go and explore and just see where your feet take you. Question 8, are you someone A, who plans trips, itineraries, and makes a real structured order of what you're going to do when you visit a place? Or are you person B, somebody who just arrives in a destination and follows your feet into the different places and just explores and sees where you end up? I hope that you've now answered all of those questions, those 8 questions, A or B, and now you should be able to see in front of you either, as I say, a collection of A's, a collection of B's, or a mixture of both. Now, if you've answered the questions honestly, and this little test has been appropriate and correct, if you have in front of you more A responses than B responses, then it would say that you're left brain dominant, okay? Left brain dominant people tend to be more quantitative and analytical. These are people who pay attention to details and are ruled by logic. The left hemisphere is rational, acquisitive, conceptual, literal, straight-laced, abstract, and analytical. Okay? So if you wrote down more A responses than B responses, the test would indicate that you are more left brain dominant. However, if you wrote down more B responses than A responses, it would indicate that you are right brain dominant. Right brain dominant people are supposed to be intuitive and creative free thinkers. They are qualitative, big picture thinkers who experience the world in terms that are descriptive and subjective. The right hemisphere is empathic, receptive, intuitive, humorous, musical, and holistic. I'm wondering if I could see your responses and your answers now, whether you'd agree with being a left brain dominant or a right brain dominant person. And or some people that have just answered those responses may have a mixture of both. Okay, so let me just clarify that again. Left brain dominant people are said to be more analytical, logical, detail and fact orientated, numerical, and likely to think in words. That's where language and speech is created in the brain. Right brain dominant people are said to be more creative, free thinking, able to see the big picture, and more likely to visualize in words. More likely to visualize more than think in words, and being more emotional and connected to feelings. Again, it'd be great to know your responses and know if you're now agreeing or disagreeing, whether you feel you're more left brain dominant or right brain dominant. Some people are a mixture of both, and I'm happy to share with you that in certain situations, I could be more left brain dominant. So if I'm completing, for example, a piece of research, or I'm doing something very business related, whereas if I'm delivering a session like I am today, or if I'm delivering a session with a client, I'll be much more right brain, more creative, more sort of connected to emotions and feelings. So I know that I have the ability to move between both and at times get pushed between both sides of my brain function. I'd be interested to know more about your experience of whether you're left brain or right brain dominant. The reason why I want to do that is to start as you get to think about psychology and your brain and your understanding of yourself. So hopefully you've left that test with a greater understanding of how your mind processes the life and the interactions with the world around it. That leads us really nicely into psychology and the definition of what it is. So psychology is the scientific study of the mind and how it dictates and influences our behavior, from communication and memory to thought and emotion. It's about understanding what makes people tick and how this understanding can help us address many of the problems and issues in society today. Okay, so psychology is the scientific study of the mind, how it dictates and influences our behavior, all the way through from communication and memory to thought and emotion. So in a nutshell, what is psychology and why are there psychologists in the world? What do they do? What are they researching or looking into? They are studying our minds, and they want to study how our mind influences our behavior, communication, memory, thoughts, and emotions. Because psychologists believe that by understanding what makes people tick, once we know that, we can then consider how that information can be used to address the problems and issues that are in our society. So you will now have a greater understanding about your left brain or right brain dominance and how that then impacts on your way of processing and interacting with the world. That helps you then think about how you maybe are influenced in your behaviors, communication, thoughts and emotions, and then also how you might therefore be somebody who interacts with a situation that comes up in our society, such as the coronavirus, and how that then is impacted upon you. Be really interested to think now about how you are now making that connection between what your understanding of yourself is and then how you then are interacting with the challenges and issues that arise in our society. And I'm going to push that a little bit further now and get you to just take a few moments away from this recording and really explore your current knowledge and understanding about these themes around mental health and well-being. So I want you to answer these two questions. What are the symptoms of poor mental health? And what are the signs that someone might be experiencing poor mental health? Okay, let me just share those with you again. What are the symptoms of poor mental health? What are the signs that someone might be currently experiencing poor mental health? And what I would encourage you to do is to now pause the recording, take a couple of minutes away and really think through the answers in your current knowledge and understanding about what it is that are the symptoms of poor mental health and the signs that somebody might be currently experiencing poor mental health. Take a few minutes and then we'll rejoin together. Okay, welcome back. What I hope you now have in front of you is a list of signs and symptoms that you recognize from your understanding. And what I've shared with you on this slide is different signs and symptoms that I recognize and think are valuable for you to know. Hopefully you'll have recognized some of them in your own list. Some of these might be new for you, but I hope that they're relevant and you take these bits of information away with you around these particular signs and symptoms that somebody might be experiencing poor mental health. So one of the first things to acknowledge is somebody who's experiencing low mood or low energy. These might be people that you work alongside or team members that you have interactions with, that their energy levels might seem very different to normal or their mood might seem a little bit lower than normal. That can often be a sign or a symptom that they might be experiencing poor mental health. Similarly, if they're emotionally drained or potentially emotionally numb, somebody who potentially would usually have quite high energy or potentially quite an emotional person, suddenly presenting as either emotionally numb to the situations that they're exposed to or potentially emotionally drained, just not feeling really emotional at all. Then moving into mindset, somebody that might be experiencing poor mental health, a sign or a symptom of that might be that they start to talk negatively about themselves. So they might start to develop a negative self-belief or be quite critical of themselves. And that might lead into that drop in confidence or a deeper feeling of them not being good enough. Quite a lot of times people will say that phrase, I just don't feel good enough, or I'm not good enough for that, or no, don't ask me to do that job or task or responsibility. Let somebody else do that. I'm not the right person for it. That can be a sign and symptom of poor mental health and something that you might want to be aware of, whether it be you that's saying that or somebody that you're close to. Another thing to consider is somebody feeling low in motivation to complete daily tasks, such as showering, eating, or exercising. Somebody that maybe is really positive about self-care, regularly sort of showering, eating healthily, exercising, maybe cycling to work, all of those sorts of things. If you start to notice that they're not completing those sorts of daily tasks that have been a part of their routine for a long time, you might be identifying that they're experiencing low motivation, and that could be a sign of poor mental health and well-being. You might start to recognize that they have high levels of anxiety, or they maybe have an inability to hold any level of uncertainty. Now, that might be extremely prevalent at the moment because of everything that's going on with the coronavirus. So it's something to be mindful of, but it might also be something that's affecting many of us. So not everybody might be experiencing poor mental health, but if it became a consistent inability to hold any level of uncertainty or a consistent period of feeling anxiety, then you should be concerned either for yourself or somebody else and encourage them or yourself to seek some support. Finally, the final point I want to make you aware of, or a sign or a symptom, is to think about significant changes in somebody's thinking, feeling, or reacting to usual and everyday life tasks and expectations. One of the greatest ways that you can see this is by maybe being in a team meeting or being in a group meeting with team members and somebody reacting in a really out of character way. Something that maybe they wouldn't have reacted negatively to in the past, but all of a sudden in that call today or over the last couple of days, they have been much more negative in tone or feeling or reaction. That can be a significant change, and that can be a sign or a symptom of poor mental health. Okay. Sometimes for people to gain a greater understanding about what poor mental health is or what it means, is a great thing to do is to compare it to good mental health. So a definitional way of understanding what somebody's good mental health would mean that they are able to think, feel, and react in the ways that they need to and want to live their life. Okay, so they may be able to think, feel, and react in the ways that they need to and that they want to live their life in the way that they are. Somebody experiencing poor mental health, on the opposite side of this consideration, poor mental health might mean that they are finding the ways that they are thinking, feeling, or reacting very difficult or maybe even impossible to cope with. So somebody with poor mental health might be really struggling with the way that they're feeling towards the world right now, or maybe the way that they're reacting to the world around them right now. And so that would be a way you could recognize poor mental health compared to somebody with good mental health who'd be feeling really engaged and be feeling like they're reacting and feeling and thinking the way that they want to be able to live their life. Final point for me around mental health, good versus bad, is to also then relate it to physical wellness and physical well-being, and that mental health is significant and needs to be respected. My hope would be that if somebody walked into an office or into a team meeting and they were limping, complaining of a leg pain, that you would all encourage them to go and seek medical support, whether that be the GP or whether that be the local A&E department. Go and get your leg sorted. Go and get yourself fixed. You shouldn't be in any pain in your leg. That's what I hope you would say. I also hope that the same would be said if somebody presented to you with low mood or a significant feeling of poor mental health. I hope your response would be similar. You'd encourage them to go to the GP. You'd encourage them to seek medical support. Because if someone's in physical pain or if someone's experiencing pain within their mental health, it's important that they get the appropriate level of support. And that's the final message that I want to share with you around that theme today. It is as important as physical well-being is someone's mental health and well-being too. Okay, what we're now going to do is progress the presentation on to speak much more specifically about the coronavirus pandemic and what that has done to our society and us as individuals. So please have a look at this slide and just for a moment absorb those images and just allow yourself to check into how you feel reconnecting and seeing the images that I've presented in those 3 photographs or pictures that you can see in front of you. When delivering this course, I would now ask people to contribute different thoughts or feelings or reactions to it. And I'm very happy to share with you that those images can create a variety of different feelings, from anger to sadness, some feelings of fear, at times some feelings of anxiety, and also some feelings of uncertainty too. Those might be some of the feelings or reactions that you've just had, but they are some of those reactions or descriptions that I've had when delivering this course recently too. So being really specific with you, when the coronavirus landed in the UK, what that did to all of us was pushed us into a period of change. Now, I know that these are now outdated, that there's more modern government guidelines regarding coronavirus, but initially, these were the things that they said to us, that we needed to stay at home, we needed to protect the NHS, and we needed to save lives, that we could no longer go outside, we needed to stay 2 meters apart, and that we needed to wash our hands as soon as we possibly could. And they encouraged us not to meet with others. That's including our friends and family, because they wanted us to stop the spread of this virus. What that meant for a lot of us is that we then had to change our whole life structures and patterns. So we all went through a significant period of change. Now, what I've presented to you on this slide is an image that's the Kubler-Ross change curve. It's a description of what it is that they present in their model of the change curve experience. Now, I'm going to talk you through it because I think it's a really good model that we can then refer to and get you to consider your experience of the changes that you've been through. The Kubler-Ross change curve starts on the left-hand side, okay? The left-hand side of the diagram, with the first stage being shock. The theory states that when we went into the coronavirus lockdown, we'll have all felt an experience of shock, a surprise. Really can't believe that this event is happening in our lives. If the theory is true and we progress in the way that it describes itself through the change curve, we then might have gone into a position of denial, disbelief. We may have been looking for evidence that this lockdown thing, this coronavirus, wasn't true, or it wasn't going to affect us in the way that the government were making out. We then may have progressed onto the stage of frustration, a recognition that actually this was true, that this was going to change our lives, that we were now going into a period of lockdown and we were going to have to significantly change our lives. And sometimes that can lead to feelings of anger and frustration. The bottom or lowest part of the change curve is described as depression, where potentially you'd have had very down days or low mood or low energy because of the change that we'll have experienced. Our lives all significantly changed. I can't emphasize that enough because of the coronavirus and lockdown that they imposed upon us. So it won't surprise me if many of you listening to this recording today also can connect to that feeling of low mood and lacking in energy because of the changes that you've experienced. The Kubler change curve would then emphasize that we then move into the experimentation phase, where you may start to implement new strategies or new ways of dealing with the situation. So thinking back to what happened, potentially you'd have gone to the supermarket once a week, you'd have found new ways of exercising at home, you'd have used your one daily break to get out and about, maybe gone for a walk or gone for a run or cycle, something like that to try and experiment with this new normal that you're then being exposed to. Next stage would have been decision, where you start to learn how to make the new situation work for you and potentially feel more positive. And the final stage being one of integration. The changes that you are then being exposed to and the changes that you've then implemented would start to feel integrated. You'd start to feel a new normal. You'd feel a renewed individual and be living a new pathway. Now, my belief from the experience that I've had when working with clients in the last 6 to 8 months is that every single person has gone through that change curve in different ways. Some people have gone step by step or stage by stage, and they can relate to all of those feelings and situations. Other people feel like they've jumped around it quite a lot. Sometimes they'll have moved from shock to, say, depression quite quickly, and then maybe gone back to denial. So for some people, it's been a linear experience, but for others, it's been a little bit more of a cyclical experience. And I want you now just to take a few moments, maybe pause the recording, just allow yourself the opportunity to think what your experience of that change curve has been and maybe where you are now currently today on that change curve. Take a couple of minutes, pause the recording, and then we'll rejoin each other in just a moment. Okay. Okay, welcome back. What I hope you've now done is been able to again develop and deepen your understanding of yourself, specifically applying that to the Kubler change curve and your experience and reaction to the change experience that we've had because of coronavirus. And you've been able to also think about where you are now on that change curve after the length of time and the period of time that we've had with all of the different adjustments and restrictions and lockdown guidance that we've all been through. Moving now specifically onto this concept around working from home or working in isolation or working remotely, depending on how you're describing it, I want us to now spend some time in this part of the presentation thinking about what impacts and challenges and risks that creates for us all if we are now changing our work patterns, we're adapting the way that we approach our working life, and we find ourselves working from home, often working in isolation. So I have 3 questions for you that I want you to think about. The first one is this: what might be the potential challenges on your mental health and well-being when working from home? I want you to also think about the potential risks on your mental health and well-being when you're working from home. And I'd also like you to think about the potential impacts on your mental health and well-being whilst you're, working from home. So, what are the challenges? What are the risks? And what might be the impacts all on your mental health and well-being as you now find yourself working from home and working in isolation? I want you to again pause this recording, take a couple of minutes away and write down your answers to those 3 questions. And I'll be really keen to understand more about your knowledge about what might be those challenges, risks and impacts for and on your mental health whilst you're working from home. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you have in front of you now a list of challenges, risks and impacts that you think you could be exposed to or experience that will impact your mental health and well-being if you then suddenly start to work from home, or you're encouraged or even have to work from home. What I've got in front of me is a couple of different things that I think are the potential challenges, which is where we'll start first, that I think can happen and can impact on people's mental health and well-being. First one being motivation levels. It's not been unusual for me to experience clients who are finding themselves working from home who are feeling really unmotivated. They don't have the same level of motivation that they've had when working in the office, feeling part of a team, being part of the business energy. Actually now finding themselves working from home is really quite strange, often feeling quite different. So they're recognizing that their motivation levels are low. That's then linking into the second point, which is around their productivity. They're recognizing that the challenge that they have is that they're just not motivated, so therefore they're just not working as hard. Therefore, they're not creating the same level of output or completing the same level of work that they would be doing or have been doing when working in the office. Final challenge that can be being experienced by people and can affect their mental health and well-being is their feeling around a loss of the team, a loss of the culture of the company, and a loss of that focus or mission being part of something as they then were working together in business or office environments. So a huge amount of challenges that can be experienced by people that can affect their mental health and well-being. Motivation levels, productivity, and I feel like they've lost something, lost the team, the culture, or the company focus. Moving on to potential risks that I've identified and been experiencing through some of the client work that I've been doing recently is a potential risk can be overthinking. People find themselves locked away, maybe in home offices or at the dining room table, often without that social interaction. So there's a lot of space to think. And now when there's a lot of space to think, if you're thinking positively and in a really focused, productive way, that's brilliant. But if you're finding yourself overthinking in a negative way, then that can actually become very destructive and extremely negative for people, which is a very strong potential risk for somebody's mental health and well-being if they're working from home. Another potential risk within that can be a feeling of isolation. And people that are working from home may be feeling very isolated from the world, isolated from team members, line managers, the business, customers, clients. That can sometimes lead from a feeling of isolation to a feeling of loneliness. And that's something that we've got to be aware of and something that we've got to try and avoid as much as possible. We don't want anybody to feel lonely or a feeling of loneliness. So if you're recognizing that in yourself or you're recognizing that in others, then we really need to think about you getting out and getting some support, because isolation and loneliness are very negative and can be very destructive things for mental health and well-being. Final thing that I'm recognizing a potential risk for mental health and well-being is when people find themselves in spirals of uncertainty or spirals of panic and anxiety, and therefore getting really mixed up in those quite intense emotions and feelings. Because there isn't the distraction of normality, or there aren't colleagues and team members around them to offer them a sense of reality in what's actually going on, sometimes people can find themselves overthinking, panicking, and then find themselves in a spiral of anxiety and panic. And those are things that can be really negative for somebody's mental health and well-being. And therefore, if they're at home, that's a real risk that that might be something they're exposed to. Moving into the final area, therefore, the potential impacts on somebody's mental health and well-being. Some of these I've mentioned before, but I'm going to re-emphasize them again. An impact on somebody's mental health and well-being when they're working at home in isolation can be on their low mood. It can lead to changes in their behaviors. Sometimes it can lead to an energy drop or even the way that they view the world and their levels of optimism. Sometimes it will, as we've mentioned, decrease their levels of productivity. So that will then impact upon their feelings about themselves and their ability to achieve. That can sometimes lead to a feeling of failure. And even in worst case scenarios, so what's the point? I'm not producing the same level of work. I feel like I'm failing. I'm not achieving what I should do. What's the point in carrying on with work? Let me just sort of chill out, go for walks, watch films, movies, for example. Negative inner beliefs can therefore be activated. I'm not good enough. And therefore that can lead to a sense of people losing their purpose or losing a sense of identity. Now, I know I've shared a lot with you there, and loads of them are potentials, but I wanted to give you my responses and answers of things that I've seen, witnessed, and heard when thinking about the challenges, impacts, and risks that people are exposed to when they start to work from home. If you're recognizing yourself in any of those, you need to keep that awareness alive and make sure that you're doing something or seeking support to help you prevent yourself from getting dragged down or getting exposed to those in any more detail or any more depth. That leads us really nicely now into thinking about how you might protect your mental health and well-being. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation when we spoke about the agenda, I'm going to break that into physical good working practices, psychological good working practices, and also emotional good working practices. Okay, so let's look at physical good working practices that you can apply to lone and home working strategies or techniques that will help protect your mental health and well-being. First thing is about being active and moving as much as possible, getting yourself physically active, whether that be a walk, a run, a cycle, an online exercise class, for example. Please get yourself active, get yourself physically moving. It's a great way to get a good exercise level or good exercise feeling into you that will boost your mental health and well-being simply by just by making yourself physically active. Second thing is about creating a working space or workstation. My strongest recommendation to you if you're working from home is to make sure you have a safe working space that you can work at. What that means is removing the possibility that you be somebody who's sitting on your sofa, or even worse, laying in bed and having the laptop on your lap and trying to complete work or work exercises in the bed or on the sofa. Make sure you've got a workstation, ideally in a spare room or home office, if needed at the dining room table. A workspace or station will make sure you feel like you have a working space that you can apply yourself at and is your working station within the home. And then that means that the rest of your home remains your home space, a safe space for you to unwind, relax, and not ensure that you're confusing the two. Working in bed or working on the sofa is a really negative thing that you can do. And so physically get yourself into a workspace or station and set that up so it's a productive space for you to engage in the working days. Likewise, if you're not in bed and you're not on the sofa, get yourself up, shower, get dressed for work as if you were actually going into the office. It will physically make you feel better, and I guarantee that will boost your mental health and well-being because you'll feel that purpose, you'll feel that identity. I am now physically preparing myself to go to work. I'm dressed for work, I'm at my workstation, let's go. If you stay in your pajamas, you don't have a shower, and you just lay yourself on the sofa, you're not going to be as productive and you're not going to be as positive in your mental health and well-being. Final thing about physical things that you can do to improve your mental health and well-being whilst you're working from home is to have agreed and structured working hours. Set them out the week ahead. So if it's a Sunday evening, for example, write down your working hours that week. What's your working structure? So for example, if it's 9 till 4 or 8 till 5, that's your working hours that week. It physically prepares you by writing it down and agreeing it to then be committed to those hours. And physically that's important because you need to make sure you've got space where you're working on, and then you need to make sure you've got physical space where you're working off the work environment. So work on and work off are vitally important for your body to know, now in these hours I'm sat here working, but at the end of my working day I can get up, I can go and walk, exercise, be around my family. So you're physically preparing yourself for those two different structures, work on and work off. That leads us really nicely into the psychological good working practices that you can apply for home working. And it's the same point. Point one is the same as the last one. Create work on and work off structures. Not only will it benefit your physical well-being and mental health, but it will also help your psychological well-being too. Agreeing those working patterns and structures means that you are psychologically and physically switched on to work, 9 till 5, 8 till 4, whatever it may be. And then you know that when you reach the end of your working day, you can psychologically switch off. You can disconnect from the working day. And that's really beneficial to make sure that you don't reach a level of burnout by finding yourself working 12, 14, 18 hours a day because you're not implementing physical and psychological working hours, and you let the working day just seep into the whole of the day or the whole of the time that you're awake that day. That's really negative and will really impact negatively on your mental health and well-being. Secondly, a psychological tool that you can implement when you're working from home is to set clear working objectives. Set yourself a target for the day. Set yourself a collection of aims for the day. What do you want to achieve? What tasks do you want completed by the time that you finish your working day at 5 o'clock? Set clear objectives for that reason, but also for the other reason, if you're working from home and you get distracted or you get pulled away from your working space, when you then return to your working space, if they're listed in front of you or they're set out in front of you, you know what objectives you've still got to get done. It gives you a position of focus and allows you to be productive. It'd be naive of us to think that you'd probably be able to sit at home 9 till 5 and not take time away from the workspace. Let's make it real. You're going to get distracted. There may be little people walking around that want to take your attention, for example. You need to then be able to know that you can refocus psychologically when you return to your workstation. And having your working objectives written out in front of you, set out clearly, is a great way of being able to do that. Third thing and final thing on the psychological tool that you can use is to make sure you manage your use of technology. The reason why I'm saying this is you may have your personal mobile phone, but on your personal mobile phone may be your work emails. You may have apps on there that are triggered or connected to work. And my fear for you would be that, say, 8 o'clock at night when you're cooking dinner, you may get a ping on your phone and it may be a work off hour. You may not be working at that time. You may be cooking dinner or talking with your family and friends, but you're disrupted. You are psychologically interrupted by something related to work. And that's a negative thing, or can have negative consequences on your mental health and well-being. So if you do implement technology, or you use apps on, say, personal devices, so you bring the professional to the personal, please make sure you manage your use of them so that they don't become disruptive and therefore have a negative impact upon you and your psychological well-being. Final thoughts around protecting your mental health and being fit within the emotional space. Okay, so these are emotional tips and strategies or tools that I think are good working practices for when you're working from home. The first thing I encourage you today is stay emotionally connected. Emotionally communicate and connect with your friends. Pick up the phone, pick up those emails. Email friends, have phone calls with friends, similarly with work colleagues. Stay connected to them. If you're a team, make sure everybody's in connection with each other so nobody falls into that trap of feeling isolated or feeling alone. Limit emotionally charged distractions. A great example I have of this was when lockdown initially happened. The daily, if not minute by minute, update on the news was constant going on in and around our society. I would encourage you to limit the time that you spend to that, whether that be on the radio or whether that be actually watching the news. I know that if you were watching the news headlines, say at the beginning of every hour or maybe every 15 to 30 minutes, that's going to have an emotional impact on you and can be a very strong emotionally charged distraction that will take you away from being focused on your work and will emotionally distract you into thinking about the pandemic, the coronavirus situation, and all of the impacts and the effects. So limit your exposure to emotionally charging distractions. Make sure that your eye-level feelings or potential feelings of isolation don't lead to loneliness. Allow yourself, if you recognize isolation, to do something about it. Stay connected, remove the feeling of loneliness, because we don't want you or anybody around you starting to feel lonely. Encourage emotional check-ins. Encourage within your team members, within your teams at work, within your friendships, within your families, emotional check-ins. Ask each other how you're feeling. This thing is going on around us. It's heavily impacting upon all of our lives. Let's talk about it. Let's emotionally allow each other to check in with each other. If you're a manager, as you're watching this presentation today, please make sure that you check in with your team. The people that you are your direct line reports. Ask them how they're feeling. How are they getting on whilst they're dealing with these big adjustments to their lives and their work structures and patterns too. Finally, my encouragement is for you to emotionally release and emotionally express. I know that comes from my psychology and psychotherapy background, and it's a space that I'm very comfortable in, but I encourage you all to get more comfortable with it too. You will be being emotionally affected by what's going on around us right now and potentially in the weeks and months ahead. Please start to allow yourself to emotionally release and express how you're feeling about it, rather than being somebody that bottles things up, carries them, and then potentially will have negative impact on their mental health and well-being because they're holding all of that emotional charge and energy. So in those 3 slides, I've spoken to you about physical things that you can do to protect your mental health and well-being, psychological and emotional too. Hopefully some of them you're already doing. Maybe some of them you need to start thinking about implementing, but they are all specifically targeted to try and help protect your own and other people around you, the mental health and well-being, so you can try and stay as positive and productive as possible. Okay, so what we're now going to do, that we've explored those 3 areas, we're now just going to focus on my top tips and tools that I want to share with you today that I believe will elevate your mood and protect your overall mental health and well-being. Okay, these might be tools, tips, strategies that you want to apply to yourself, but these also might be really good ideas or good things to share with the people around you. And by that, I mean team members, colleagues, people that you work with, but also potentially family and friends too, because it's important that we look after as many people as possible at this time of challenge and uncertainty that we are facing. So first thing is about holding a clear and structured routine. I just mentioned in those previous slides the physical and psychological benefit that that can have for you. I strongly recommend that you make sure that you maintain clear and structured routines in all aspects of your life as we continue to be in these periods of lockdown and then transition and positions within the coronavirus situation. I encourage you strongly to have a dedicated workspace and make sure you dress for work. It's a great way of physically and psychologically switching your mind on to the working day and making sure that you're in a safe workspace. That means you know you can get done what you need to get done that day. You can be as productive and focused as you need to be, but then you know that you can also walk away from that space and close that space down when you don't want to be in work mode. I encourage you always to be physically active and move as much as possible, and I increase the importance on that at this period of time too. The benefit of exercising, the benefits are great and really significant, and I really think that there's potential, if we're now all working from home, that actually getting out and about at least once a day will be significant, and I really encourage you to adopt that into your lifestyle if you're not already doing it. I also encourage you to remain grounded in reality. Stay in the what is mindset rather than the what if mindset. The what if mindset is where people find themselves overthinking and often leading themselves into catastrophe thinking. These will be people that find themselves thinking things like, what if this coronavirus situation never improves? Or what if we go into a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th lockdown experience? What if I'm never able to return to the workplace? Or what if my office never opens? What if my business has to close or ends because of this coronavirus situation? They're all what if scenarios and what if thoughts. They're not grounded in reality. And that's where I encourage you to stay. When there's huge pockets of uncertainty, what is mindset is extremely powerful. So the what is mindset is, what is it that I can do today to be focused, to be productive, to be performing at the levels that I want to? What is it that I can set as a target? What is it that I need right now? What is it that I want or can do to ensure that I keep myself safe at this time of uncertainty? Stay in the what is mindset. Don't allow yourself to drift into the what if mindset. I encourage you all to give back to yourselves, reward yourselves, engage positively with yourselves. That might be, as some of my clients have done, learning new recipes, trying to bake sourdough or bake breads, or learn a new skill like a musical instrument, or pick up a 2nd language. Give back to yourself. Allow yourself to engage positively with something that you feel is beneficial for yourself, so that you get to give back to yourself in this time that we are all finding ourselves in. I also encourage you to find an energy source that will increase your positivity instantly. And by that, I mean, it might be your favorite musical artist. So maybe listening to a couple of songs from your favorite album that they've created. It may be watching 10 minutes of comedy from your favorite stand-up comedian. Something like that, that's an energy source that would increase your productivity or your positivity. And I've been noticing and implementing that with some of my clients, particularly in the early parts of the afternoons, when maybe their focus is dropping, their motivation's dropping, and they need an increase of energy that they would get from others if they were sat in the office. If you're sat at home and you're on your own, find another way of gauging that energy. And I'd encourage you to think about how you might go about doing that. Final thing, final top tip or strategy from me that's going to protect your overall mental health and well-being is to talk about your mental health. Now more than ever, it's important that we as a society encourage ourselves and each other to talk about our feelings and our mental health reactions and responses to this such an unusual period of time that we find ourselves in. And I strongly encourage you all to talk more about your mental health. Okay, so final thoughts from this final part of this section of the presentation is about the fact that isolated working is something that none of us have chosen for ourselves. It's something that's been enforced upon us by the government within the lockdown restrictions. And so if you're finding yourself working from home and it's not your choice, make sure that you recognize that, particularly if there's some frustration or some feelings of anger towards the fact that you're finding yourself working from home. It's different for people that have been working from home for many years, or maybe it's been an expectation of their role. They may be really familiar with it, and this may feel like the norm. But for those of us that have been office-based or workplace-based, this now will be very, very different. And as I say, let me emphasize to you again, it's not been your choice. It may have been the choice, as I say, from the government or from your organization to make sure that you work from home to keep yourself safe at this period of time. Therefore, with it being given to you and something that you have to do, I encourage you to know yourself and adapt home working to you. Make it work for you as best as possible whilst you're finding yourself in the situation of having to do it. And with every approach that you take, every tip, strategy, tool, approach that I've offered to you today, or you've already started to implement, please be brave, try some things out, but remain honest. And I emphasize the importance of remaining honest, because if it's not working, or if you're finding it's having a negative impact on you, please stop doing it. Try it, adjust it, but ultimately stop doing something if you notice that it's having negative impacts or negative outcomes on you. The reason why I'm saying that is because there's many different ways that you can make working from home work for you. And so if you're trying different strategies and techniques and they are not working, or they are creating negative outcomes or impacts, just stop doing them and try something else, try something new. And I believe that you will eventually be able to find a really productive, positive way of working from home and making that situation work for you in the best way possible. Okay, we now move into the final part of the presentation, which is where we start to think about not just your own experiences and how to protect your own mental health and well-being whilst you're working from home or working in isolation, but now starting to think about how you might support colleagues, team members, friends who are also finding themselves in this new situation of maybe working from home and finding themselves maybe in different emotional reactions or maybe psychological reactions to the fact that they're working from home in these new times. The first thing that I want you to encourage you to think about is that you should be supporting them, not diagnosing them. That's why I titled the slide in the way that I do. So the first thing that I encourage you to do is stay in contact with people. So if you're a line manager and you've got, say, 4, 6 direct line reports, please make sure that you're calling to check in with them, asking them how they are, rather than simply just always calling to check up on them. Now, we will all know people that do that. We will know people that call us to check up on us. What are you doing? How are you getting on? Maybe, have you done that yet? Those sorts of questions, rather than the check-in questions, which are, how are you getting on? How are you feeling? What's it been like for you this week? If you're connecting with people, please use the check-in option rather than the check-up option. It instantly opens up the opportunity for further dialogue and communication that will hopefully mean that they'll be open with you and more honest with you. If you start to check up on people, my belief is that it will close down the conversation and they will be less likely to be open with you and talk to you honestly about their experience and the reality that they're going through. One of the things that I also want to share with you today is about if you're working with people, ask them how they're getting on with their workload. I was conscious of a client in the early part of the lockdown experience that actually found themselves not having enough work to do. Now, some of you might think that that would be a brilliant option, but for them, it started to create a feeling of anxiety. They were really unsure how to best to say to their line manager, to their boss, hey, not got enough work to do, because they feared that their boss would then question their role or question the purpose or benefit of having them within the organization. So check the workload for A, have they got too much? But also B, have you got enough to be doing and getting yourself on with? Because actually it's about finding the right balance that people feel challenged and stretched, that they've got enough to do, but not that they feel like they've got too much or too little, because we're recognizing that that can both have very negative impacts upon people and their mental health and well-being. Finally, think about how to get the best out of yourself and how to get the best out of others. Now, I recognize this might be quite controversial, but I'm encouraging managers that I'm working with to talk to their people and get them to talk about how to get the best out of themselves with the number of hours that they work each day. I'm very keen to promote, and I think it's a really positive thing, if you speak to somebody that you work with and they know themselves, now that they're working from home in these new circumstances, that they will work better and more productively for, say, 5 hours a day, rather than committing to the usual 8 hours a day, then I encourage you to support that. I encourage you to get them to invest 5 hours a day, really productive working hours, then enforcing on them old patterns of working that means they have to stay on the computer 8 hours a day. I think now's the time to be flexible and think about what you can do to get the best out of your people, rather than trying to enforce older measures and older things. So think about what you could do to get the best out of yourselves. It might be 2 to 3 hours in the morning, a 2, 3, 4 hour break, and then 2, 3 hours in the evening, for example. Now's the time to be creative. Let's get the best out of ourselves and others. Another way that you can support colleagues and support people around you, rather than being clinical or critical, is to share things like Zoom lunches together. Now, I'm aware you may have reached a feeling of Zoom fatigue. You might already be feeling it on this training course today. But I encourage you to share contact with people. And one way to do that, if we can't do that physically at the moment because of what's going on with coronavirus, invite people for lunch. But do it over a Zoom platform, but change the energy on the call. Enforce the rule. There is no work chat or no work talk allowed during this 40-minute Zoom lunch. Talk about each other. Talk about lives, feelings, reactions, potentially even talk about mental health. Get it out there, share and connect with each other, how you're feeling, what's going on, and be supportive of each other as we continue to go through these challenging times. Final thing for me to get you to think about in this space is about how you can approach somebody if you are concerned with them that they might be suffering from poor mental health, or they may be affected in their mental health and well-being. My encouragement for you to think about and to do is to be honest with them if you are concerned, but make sure that you share a concern, not a diagnosis. So an example of that might be to say something along the lines of, "Hi Sam, how are you doing? Just to let you know, you seem a bit different today, and I'm just wondering how you're getting on or finding all of this working from home that we're having to do." Okay? That question posed in that way is really open, curious, and in no way clinical or diagnostic. You're not telling somebody that they've got a mental health problem. You're wondering with them and asking them how they're feeling and how they're getting on. Similarly, you may use this approach. "Hey, Sam, how are you getting on and how are you managing to stay focused? I'm not sure about you, but all I want to do is play with my children or watch films or go out for a walk, etc. I want to do anything other than stay focused on work. How are you managing it? How are you managing to stay focused?" Again, posing a question or having a discussion with somebody in that way means that hopefully they'll feel open and supported by you, interested, that they want to be part of that conversation. It keeps the conversation open, and it means that you're remaining curious, not clinical, okay? And that's a significant thing to do. The reason why that's significant and important and why you should support your colleagues is backed up by the quote that's on the top of this next slide. "People with a mental illness can hold down a successful job. We all probably work with someone experiencing a mental health problem. Now that's released from the same people that I mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation today. Time to Change 2020. They emphasize that people with a mental illness can hold down a successful job. That therefore means that we all, that's you and me, probably work with someone experiencing a mental health difficulty. If that is the truth and that's the reality, and now we're talking about every single one of us going through a really significant life change because of the coronavirus pandemic, we now find ourselves working in ways that we've never worked in before and potentially at home working remotely and working in isolation, their mental health and our mental health will be pushed and potentially strained. If they're already somebody who's experiencing a mental health problem, it could re-emphasize that challenge that they have. So therefore, we need to support each other. We need to be there for each other at this time. So going into this slide's final points, please find an approach that supports someone and doesn't try to diagnose them or come across in a clinical, judgmental way. Never use diagnostic language or a clinical approach. The impact can be that if someone feels like you're looking to diagnose them or tell them in a judgmental way what's wrong with them, they can start to hide the signs, or they might start to present in a false way. These will be people that every question you ask them, they just say, I'm fine, I'm fine. How are you getting on, Sam? I'm fine. How are you feeling about lockdown? I'm fine. It's almost like a physical, emotional, psychological barrier that they're trying to push you away by just saying, I'm fine. The way to not get stuck into that trap or push someone into feeling like they're being judged by you is to have meaningful contacts with everybody that you speak to. Have meaningful contacts with the people that you interact with, that you're in teams with, and that you work with or you live with. Make sure it remains in a space of support, not in a space of clinical or feeling diagnostic. Okay, so that starts to now bring us to the very end of the presentation. And here are just a couple of additional tasks that I encourage you to complete in your own time as you now progress away from the presentation that we've shared together today. Task 1, I encourage you to go back to the change curve, the Kubler-Ross change curve on one of those earlier slides. Start to consider again yourself within it and potentially share it with somebody and encourage them to think about where they are on the change curve and use the change curve diagram as a way of talking to each other about how you're experiencing and reacting to the change that we've all gone through. Task 2, reviews what steps you've taken to ensure you're able to work from home successfully. Ask yourself and be honest, are they working? Or do you actually now need to make changes and potentially implement some of the tips or strategies or tools that I talked about earlier in the presentation? Task 3, write a home working weekly routine or schedule. I push you and I challenge you to think about what are your on working hours and what are your off working hours. Task 4, consider the people around you, your teammates, your colleagues, your workmates. Reach out to them and share meaningful contacts. Hopefully you're already doing that, but if you're not, I encourage you to step up and start doing it today. Check in with them, do not check up on them. Trust me, they will know the difference, just as you will know the difference if people are doing it back to you. Final task that I encourage you to think about is discussing what you've learned today or what you've heard me describe to you today with your manager or your business leaders. How will you support your colleagues' mental health and well-being as these coronavirus restrictions remain in place and as we start to transition back to office working? It's really fundamental that for the success of that transition, your managers and business leaders are thinking about these things and considering each and everybody as a unique individual alongside the needs of the business. If you can be the person that instigates or starts that conversation, then I think that's a really positive thing for you to be able to do. If we were now in a traditional training course, or if I was delivering this to you in an interactive way, I'd now open the floor for questions. I'm conscious that that's not possible because it's being a recording of this presentation, but therefore what I ask you to do is to take down my contact details or reach out to me if you would like to, and reach out, maybe ask any questions that may have appeared to you or come to you as you've gone through the presentation today. I'd be more than happy to hear from you and I invite you to do so. Any other feedback or comments that you've made about the course, I encourage you to contact Lewis Horner at Riverside Training and make direct contact with him to discuss any of the components or questions that you may have that don't relate to the content specifically. I really hope that you've enjoyed the time that we've shared together and that you've found some of the material, if not all of the material, relevant and applicable to you. It would be my hope that you find a way, or you find multiple ways, to manage your mental health and well-being, protecting it in the best way possible as we continue to work from home, or as we continue to work from home and return to the office workspace, as now we are entering this continued period of lockdown restrictions, lightening in some areas and remaining in others. I wish you all the very best of success with whatever your current situation is, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or follow-up thoughts regarding anything that we've discussed today. I wish you best wishes, thank you for your time, and good luck with everything in the future.